Hello and welcome back to Land Rover Toolbox videos once again. Okay, today we're going to get the 110 up on the ramps in a workshop and have a look underneath this. This is basically because it's easier to show you with a camera than it is to crawl underneath on the drive. However, the technique is exactly the same. Okay, so you can see I actually work for DAF Trucks, and the workshop is a DAF Truck workshop. Basically, an inspection technique would be looking for things like loose engine mounts, loose bolts, loose chassis mounts. And you'll see also that there is a hammer in my hand and a torch, which is to check for loose bolts. The idea to do a chassis check underneath is to make sure that the vehicle or all the components on the vehicle are secure. What we're going to be doing is having a look at some of the components underneath, and then we're going to have a look at the chassis, which is probably the backbone of the vehicle, which is the most important for Land Rover owners to be concerned about. We've already covered suspension and the back axle, brakes, etc. So let's concentrate on mountings first. Okay, so the engine and the gearbox are mounted on rubber blocks. Okay, these are the gearbox mountings here. They should be in good condition, not perished, split or loose. Usually you can tell if a component like this is loose, and you'll find that your transmission will knock when you take up a drive. With the engine mounts, they're a bit difficult to see on the 300 TDI, but they have a drop facility. If the rubber splits, they will drop into a V and the engine will not drop out of the chassis. What you should be checking for is looseness of bolts and the condition of the rubbers, as usual, both on the other side there. If you can see up here where I'm pointing to, if the engine mount fails, it will knock like hell, but the engine will not drop onto the transmission components. Again, this should be in good condition and not loose. We should also make sure that the brackets to chassis are not loose, badly welded or corroded to the point where they're going to drop off. The chassis here is quite preserved because of the grease that gets flung from the prop shaft. Rubber exhaust mounts stop vibrations, and also you should be checking for your exhaust to make sure it's not rattling on any other part or metal part of the vehicle. Now, sometimes you'll find that some people will not put these in, they'll use a bit of wire or something. It's not right. Okay, when we're checking the exhaust, we really want to be checking to make sure that there are no leaks, especially around the silencer joints. Okay, that's front and back. And on the clamp here, luckily the 300 TDI comes in sections so it can be changed. Now, we're looking at the back here, it's suspended, but it's very, very close to a metal component. If it's touching, it will actually rattle through the bodywork, so you should be taking note of where it's run through and if it's actually touching anything on the system. Now, this exhaust is getting corroded. 2 weeks after the inspection, the exhaust started to blow. So we've replaced this already. The exhaust downpipe bolted to the manifold is a likely candidate for exhaust gas blowing, as it has a gasket there. And also looking further down the system past the flexi pipe, we see the catalytic converter is about 3 millimeters off the chassis. Now when the engine starts up, it rattles slightly and causes an annoying rattle, so the exhaust needs to be adjusted here. Okay, so actually inspecting the chassis frame itself, we're looking for corrosion or advanced corrosion, splits and failed welds, or any component that might have come loose. Usually you can see that rust will be dripping through the bolts, unless they're completely rusted. But basically we're having a good look to see that the components or the major suspension components are bolted properly. We're also looking to make sure that the cross members themselves are in good condition and are fixed to the ladder frame itself. It's fairly pointless inspecting a vehicle that is covered in mud like this, because this will cover a multitude of crimes. The outriggers, or the parts that are welded to the ladder frame, basically can end up like this very quickly. It's not uncommon to find that an outrigger has failed. If the rest of the chassis is in good condition, these can be cut off and re-welded. But basically, if a component collapses under thumb pressure, then you know you have serious problems with corrosion. The chassis, basically, because it's steel, is susceptible to corrosion, but the outriggers and the rear cross member especially, they trap water and then will corrode very quickly. Now, getting back to our vehicle here, we can see that the main frame and the cross members for the bodywork are in fairly good condition. Checking Outriggers is easy because it is open. So you can see where the corrosion, if there is any, is developing. However, with your box section chassis, this is a different story. You can see the surface rust, but inside the box section, it could be a totally different story. One corrosion assessment technique is to use a hammer like so, and listen to see if there's any dull thuds. Basically, on this chassis here, it's been patched. And you can see the patching here and the little bits of MIG welding wire that have been stuck to the chassis. But what I'm concerned about is where the arrow is pointing now, there is corrosion working its way through. Now this is working its way from the inside to the outside, so this will actually collapse very shortly. 100% guaranteed that if it's been patched, the chassis will be rotting underneath the patches. Okay, so far so good, until we get to near the back end. So what we're looking at here is a split in the chassis member on the offside. This chassis member is that rotten that the corrosion is collapsing under thumb pressure. I'll just open this up just a little bit more and you'll see the amount of metal, or the oxidized metal, that is falling out of the chassis member. Basically, it's because it's been rotting from the inside outwards. The vehicle has had a cross member put on it in the last couple of years. However, the rear section members are completely and utterly rotten. So what I'm just doing here is poking out to see exactly how much rot there is. Removing the tank, you can see now where the crack was. There is a considerable amount of corrosion on the chassis ladder frame member. So basically the decision that we've got to make is, what do we do? Do we weld this, or do we fit a quarter chassis on, or do we replace the chassis completely? There is a comprehensive list of parts that are available for repairing chassis, cross members, spring seats and the rear cross members. What we're concerned with is the quarter part of the end of the chassis rails, and basically number 32 is a quarter chassis, which possibly could get us out of our problem here by cutting the old out and putting new in. You can see how far the corrosion has actually gone back, which will be past the tank. And to be honest with you, this would possibly need half a chassis rather than a quarter chassis, because we also need to splice in some metal to weld the quarter chassis too. Okay, so we have a little bit of a disaster on our hands with the chassis, and you can see the condition of it, or how it looks, just before doing a corrosion assessment. Now we're looking at other parts of the chassis at the rear, and they don't look too good because the corrosion will be inside as well as outside. This is the front part of the chassis, which is okay, there's only surface rust. But as the rear here, we have lost the rear end of the chassis completely. This is common to Land Rovers because the water gets trapped in the box frame. It will corrode from the inside out, and very quickly on some occasions. So basically, we're going to have to go away and lick our disappointed wounds. As some of you already know, it is disappointing to find the chassis is rotten, because it is a fair amount of work to do. Now, the next thing to do is to do some assessments to see what we're going to do. Either weld the chassis up or replace it completely. What do you think?